It's great to be here. Before I can talk about what I do at Fed by Threads, I'm going to take you back to when I was a kid. I grew up in working class West Philadelphia. It's a complicated neighborhood, mixed racially. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. My father was a first generation immigrant who came here by boat from India to pursue his bachelor's degree and eventually get a PhD and become a world-renowned anthropologist. My late mother grew up in small town New York State, also didn't have a ton of money and used the Peace Corps and getting a PhD to get out of small town and see the world. So early on in my life, I understood inequality, I understood class, I felt it. They sent me to private school downtown in Philadelphia, and I knew that we didn't have a lot. We had more than some folks, we didn't have a lot. And so a decision I made at my young age was, I don't want to be poor. I don't want to be poor. And so I spent, that was us back in the day. So heading into my 20s, I decided I was going to go to Wall Street. And I was going to become an investment banker, and I was going to earn as much money as I possibly could earn because I didn't want to be poor. I wanted to have a big house, drive a fancy car, be able to have as much food as I wanted, and take care of a family and live the typical American dream. But heading into my middle of my college years, I knew there would be a wake-up call. And I had an epiphany when I was about 19. I was driving in India. My parents and I had gone back to my fatherland. We were going to one of the most beautiful places you can imagine, on a drive that looked much like this. It was a hair-raising drive. We had a private driver who was using the center lane to pass cars and play chicken with oncoming traffic. And I was sitting in the rear of this car, the rickety car, right? And I had one of those rear-facing seats. So I'm watching all these near disasters kind of in reverse. And many people talk about how when you're in kind of near-death experiences, and in this case it was kind of repeated near-death experiences, how your life can flash in front of you. Well, in my case, my life wasn't flashing in front of me. I all of a sudden started having a conversation with the older Alok. The Alok who maybe was 60, 70, 80, maybe heading towards my deathbed. And that older Alok started saying, what did you spend your life doing? Who did you spend your life around? Did your life matter? Did your life have any sort of positive impact? Or did you just chase money? And I realized in that moment that my life had to matter. Right? So in this crazy ride, I will never forget it. It was clear as anything that the path I was on, and if I was to die right in that car, I would have been disappointed in the journey that I had gone on. So I got back to university that January. I ditched the path to becoming an investment banker. I started studying about the world, social justice, human rights, the environment, animal welfare, democracy, capitalism, every sort of structure that was around me that shaped the world that I was looking at in order to understand better the role that I would play in that world going forward. But the problem was there was a huge divide between this expanded worldview of all the things that I saw going not quite right in the world and the choices that I was making in my daily life. I didn't really want to change myself. And I realized that I was the problem. That I was at the root of a lot of the things that I saw that were broken. And so the rest of my life has been trying to bridge that gap between a desire for a better world and the choices and decisions I would be willing to make to get there, bridging those two. My name is Alok Upadhyay. I'm co-founder and CEO, and as a member of my growing team says, a Chief Integrity Officer at Fed by Threads. We are the first American-made, multi-brand, sweatshop-free organic clothing store in the entire country that feeds emergency meals to Americans in need. I got a letter in 2011, about November 2011, that rocked me about hunger in America. 46 million Americans face food insecurity. This includes about 16 to 17 million American kids. This is in the richest country in the world, where we also throw out 30 to 40% of our food. And that just seemed crazy to me. And a little idea that we had started with one rack of t-shirts has since grown into being 490,312 meals that we fed to date. We support an ecosystem of about 150 direct or indirect American garment jobs. And we're leading the charge to reduce our impact on the environment. And this is all done through the decisions of what we wear. These consumer choices and connecting our heart to what we want the world to look like around us. And I'm going to take you on that journey. But the bulk of my talk tonight is on something that I call the hum of normalcy. The hum of normalcy. Because what I realized was, in order for me to bridge that divide I was telling you about between this grand worldview of how we can change things and the decisions I want to make for my own desires and my own life, I would have to break what I call the hum of normalcy. This idea first came to me by a man named Daniel Quinn, who wrote a book called Ishmael. Now, it's an interesting book about a gorilla who puts an ad in a newspaper. He's in an office building, and he puts an ad saying, if you'd like to change the world, come to my office building. And to be honest, I read the book so long ago, and I don't remember most of the book. But there are two main ideas of the conversations between the gorilla and this man that stuck with me forever. And one is that the gorilla says to the man, you've been born with a hum in your ear since you were born that said, consume, consume, you can consume some more, and just throw it out because there's a garbage truck that will take it away and you can keep consuming. And that's been normal for you since you were born in this society. And the second idea that the gorilla poses is he says, mankind is akin to when man was learning to fly. And man built all these contraptions, right? These wings, and man would run off a cliff with these wings and be flying. But we all know how most of those early test flights ended, right? The man or the woman thought they were flying, but they really end up crashing. Now, while these ideas are not uplifting by any stretch of the imagination, they were very formative to me, that I would have to think about how to break that hum of normalcy, as well as what is my role in making sure that humankind doesn't crash. Now, this is a very overwhelming predicament. How am I going to overhaul my own life as well as do something to change the world? Where do you start? When I was in my 20s and I was thinking about these ideas, there was no roadmap. There was nobody who said, hey, you want to change your entire life, you go like this. I've had to sort of invent it to some degree as I went along. And so I simplified it and I said, well, what are our basic needs as humans? And I think we can all agree, sort of the food, clothing, shelter trifecta cover a lot of our needs. So I began with food. Up until that point, I was eating everything. In my household, my father was a vegetarian South Indian cook, but outside of the house, my mother and I, we'd eat whatever we could get our hands on. We were budding foodies, and we felt that cultivating our taste palates and traveling the world and eating whatever they would have to offer was the way to go. And I was in the Middle East, and I ran into a butcher shop much like this one. And I'd never seen anything like this. It was open air, right? All the chickens were in cages, and you just go, you pick your chicken, you weigh it, he slaughters it right there, and you walk home with a bag and you cook dinner. And I thought to myself, wow, I have never seen this in my life. Chicken was always on styrofoam little pallets with cellophane wrapped over it and that little wet pad underneath, that sucks up the water. And the only hunting I had ever done was hunting for the lowest prices in the grocery store. So I walked into a shop like this and I said to the man, I didn't have much Arabic and he didn't have much English, but I conveyed that I wanted to learn his craft. I wanted to kill a chicken. And he looked at me and he sort of said, you want to do this? And I said, I want to do this. So I picked my chicken, I weighed it, I paid him, and he took me around the wall, because it's all happening right there. There's no separation, right, between production, and my heart's pumping through all this, right, because a lot of emotion is going through me as I'm about to do something I've never done. And unlike the United States, where there's a huge distance between where things actually occur and our plates, here it was just me walking around a wall. And he put the chicken in my hand, showed me how to pull the head back, put a knife in my hand, and showed me where to slit. Now, my first pass did nothing. And I realized that to take life and to connect to taking life, I'd have to really put something into it. And so I did. And the next one, let blood flow. I let the chicken bleed out. I boiled it. I defeathered it. And then he showed me how to gut it and gave me a little plastic bag with warm chicken meat in a neatly tied bow and welcomed me on my way. And I walked out with that baggie and a heart that was incredibly confused, right? It was the first time that I was taking life and that I was connecting to where my food came from and connecting deeply to the sacrifice that this chicken made for me to be able to go back. I was traveling with friends and say, I have dinner tonight. I got it a little differently than I'd ever gotten it before. And my first thought as I was walking out was, I don't think I could do that to a cow, right? And then I started wondering, why could I do it to the chicken, but I couldn't do it to the cow? Was it that the cow's bigger, that I have more compassion and love for the cow, the chicken's more disposable, right? These are the thoughts that just started flooding into my existence with this action that I had taken. And I realized that we have a hierarchy of animals, and that the hum of normalcy since I was young has taught me to view animals differently, right? Not just differently than myself, but differently from one another. Because I had a black lab that was like my sister, a dog, right? We loved the dog, and if anyone had tried to harm my dog, I don't know what I would have done. She was my sister. But so now why do I think of the chicken and the cow very differently than my pet? And I still have friends of mine who can explain this difference to me, but I thought, wait a second, this hum of normalcy that's told me that these creatures are actually very different was actually something that I could no longer totally wrap my arms around. And it was the beginning of the break of the hum of normalcy in my life. So on this journey about food and animals and all that, because that's how I was consuming, I started having to look at truth. And unfortunately, the road to compassion sometimes goes through some murky territories about truth that is not very comfortable. And this is much of the reality of where animals come from. And the hum of normalcy will say, don't look at this. Don't look at this. You don't really want to know about this, right? And I grew up that way, not wanting to know about this. But as the more I learned about industrial factory farming and how food is coming to our plates, I realized my heart could no longer ignore these truths. That my daily choices of what I was purchasing was leading to that. And that was an incredible wake-up call for me. And I said to myself, if I'm going to live in compassion, if I'm going to go through this path, I have to think a little differently about this. I can't close my eyes. So I made a small choice. I decided I would go vegetarian for 30 days, and if I didn't die, I would keep going with it, you know? And I thought for sure I'd either die or I would break and I would just go back to the bacon and the chicken and the meat and steaks and all that. But I said, if I don't die, I'm going to keep going with that little experiment. And I'm not suggesting that everyone in the audience go vegetarian, though most of you will not die from that choice, I assure you. But it did pave a way for thinking about things differently. And I do suggest this slightly controversial idea of go find a farm and kill an animal. Connect. Build a compassionate connection to what you want for yourself. This will surely define for yourself where your heart is. And so you may say, yes, I am perfectly capable, and I'm going to start doing this as a way to feed my family. And I will support that way of thinking. I'm not militant. I find common ground. Hunters and I actually have a lot more common ground than people who just blindly want factory farm meat, right? So I say, kill an animal. But if not, if you're not going to go that far, which I recognize most of us probably won't rush to do that, start sourcing where your meat is coming from, right? We can find farms that treat animals not like that previous photo I showed you, but better. And this began my journey of thinking about my level of compassion, my heart, and the daily choices of what I took to source for me and what I need. Now again, a little bumpy, but still a path forward, and I was on my way. People say to me, well, of course, since you don't eat meat anymore, would you like some fish? And I'm like, well, what part of the vegetarian part is confusing there? But no, I say, I did go on a journey, and I used to think that fish was, came from people on a boat with a fishing rod, somewhere out there, and a few people, and they reel them in and bring them to market, and then you can get your fish. And in some parts of the world, that still happens. But the bulk of the 90 billion fish that are removed from oceans happens this way. This is called a super trawler. And they have nets that can go over the size of jumbo jets. And they have technology that can find the fish, and they can just take as much of the fish out as the market will purchase, right? 90 billion a year. Now the thing is, I love oceans. I bet many people in here love oceans. And all of a sudden I was in conflict of how can I love oceans and still eat these? So I'm not suggesting that you won't eat fish, but there are tools out there, Seafood Watch, or apps that can help you begin to say, where's the fish coming from? Who's fishing the fish, right? It becomes a conversation about where things are coming from and what I'm going to consume. And maybe, just maybe, we eat a little less fish, which I think is totally doable for everyone in the room. We just eat a little bit less and be a little more conscious about the sacrifice of the fish for us. In my journey, the hardest one was dairy. I don't know about anybody else, but I ate a ton of ice cream when I was growing up. And I thought, the meat and the fish, okay, I can totally get there, but the dairy was really hard. The ice cream, and the big one was the cheese, right? How can I get rid of the cheese or give it up or change my relationship to the cheese? Now, I learned something recently that's fascinating about cheese. Cheese triggers the same part of your brain as hard drugs. Right? So it made sense all of a sudden why this would be the hardest one for me to tackle. Because it's not just my tongue and my stomach that's thrilled about the cheese introduction into my body. It is my brain that is thrilled. It is hitting something in my brain that my brain is going to want.
Could you clarify which hard drugs?
On the side, we can go into that. And so this was the hum of normalcy that I really didn't want to break. The cows just get milked, right? Ever since I was young, milk makes your bones strong. Who's heard that? A few of us, because they've paid a lot of money to make sure everybody in this room has heard that milk makes your bones strong. Until I learned that countries that have the highest milk consumption have the greatest rates of hip fracture. Right? So all of a sudden that thing that wasn't actually told for me from doctors, but was told for me from advertising, turned out not to be true. And I thought, I'm going to have to break this hum of normalcy about the realities for cows. Yeah, I know. And your heart has to feel something here, okay? Because industrial dairy production is a reality that isn't comfortable. And it is a cycle of impregnation and the birth and the calf being taken away so that the cow can be milked. And I used to think the life of a meat cow in our society was bad. The only thing worse than being a meat cow is being a dairy cow, because you'll be milked for about 4 years when your lifespan could be 20, and then you'll be turned into a meat cow. So I thought to myself, my heart is breaking. These truths of what I do, I am the root. And little by little, I'm shattering my heart, but I'm also shattering that hum of normalcy. That I could no longer just say, this is all normal. It wasn't just food, and you can be relieved that the food section's over. But it was houses, right? The home of normalcy said, hey, chase a big house. Go live with a fancy car. Get a bigger and bigger. The more your career grows, the bigger the size of your house. And that was the American dream. Well, as part of breaking my home of normalcy, I've shifted to these things. Has anybody ever seen what's inside one of these? These are fascinating little structures that can take care of all of your needs, but they may not meet all of your greed, right? The old Gandhi line. Now, I'm not suggesting that we will all go live in 191 square feet. It's quite small, especially if we have a kid or two running around. But I'm in about 400 square feet with a kid, and I've got a great view. I've downscaled. It meant getting rid of a ton of stuff, shedding, and focusing on what gives me joy. And so shrinking the size of the houses we may have an imagination about, we may not get to 191 square feet, but I actually have customers at Fed by Threads who will come in and say to me, hey, my husband, my 2 kids and I, we're going to go from 1,200 square feet down to 900 square feet. It requires less utilities, lower carbon footprint on the earth. You get to spend more time closer together, which, depending on family, we don't always want that, but there's a lot of upsides, and that's part of the lifestyle. But clothing seemed something that I had no idea how I was going to change. Fed by Threads started as one letter from the community food bank about hunger, and we put 1 rack of t-shirts out at our old dance and yoga studio, and we said, we'll feed meals through food banks from every one of these shirts, and people loved the idea. But unfortunately, with clothing too, I would have to break the hum of normalcy. And the hum of normalcy is this. These are these intense factory scenes that are often in very faraway countries that produce fast fashion at the low end, which brings new styles to market as fast as possible at low price as possible, right? $5 shirts at Target, H&M, Zara. But these factories are also used by the fancy brands, right? So you're either overpaying for name brands that look for the cheapest labor, or underpaying for fast fashion that also looks for the cheapest labor. And the first shirts that we got at Fed by Threads, they were cheap and cute off the internet. And they fell right into this storyline. And that rocked me. And I was like, I cannot know these truths and have Fed by Threads have a mission to feed people across America, but also be employing people at very low wages and unsafe working conditions. That doesn't line up. If we're going to ask questions about compassion, I couldn't stop at a good mission to feed people, which is what everyone knows us for. I had to go further. I had to dig into this question. Because sadly, that happened. Many of you may know about Rana Plaza. This was a sweatshop in Bangladesh that collapsed and 1,100 people died and 2,500 were injured. Not from a terrorist attack, but for making clothes for Western brands. And that's crazy that people should die so that we can have low prices or fancy name brands. My heart couldn't line up with that. So we made a change. We said we've got to make sure we have no sweatshop labor anywhere in our store. And so the easiest way for us to do that was to go Made in America. Why? Because it's illegal to have sweatshops here, right? You cannot do it, and if you do it, you're going to get shut down pretty quick. And so we went all Made in America. You can now walk around my store and read every rack sign and see the exact state, if not city, where every garment's produced, and know that you're supporting quality garment jobs in those microeconomies and helping those people put food on the table. And what we see when quality manufacturing jobs go up, we tend to see crime rates go down, we tend to see schools get better. There's a whole cycle that starts happening as a result of shifting how we think about where stuff comes from. But I couldn't stop at just rethinking the labor. That was only one piece of the puzzle. I had to look at the fabric. And the reality is that cotton, traditional cotton, uses 25% of global pesticides. It can be sprayed in parts of the world by people that look like this. We're tending to see health consequences on their health. And again, the hum of normalcy would say, don't think about this. This is in a very far away country. Or it's in Texas, in the largest cotton patch in the world, 3.2 million acres. heavily pesticide-based, where men and women are beginning to see brain tumors at ages like 40, 45. And people are beginning to say, what's going on? And of course, it'll take another 20, 30 years before people will say, oh, it was the pesticides. But people are beginning to wake up and say something is going on with air quality, soil quality, and the water having to do with all the pesticides in the fabrics to grow the fabrics. But it wasn't just that, it was those colors. How do they get those beautiful colors? Well, the companies find places in the world where they can just dump the waste into clean drinking water. And I think everybody in here drinks water, most likely daily. I like water, and I want to be part of protecting water. And people say, what does it matter that you're shifting to sustainable organic fabrics? Well, we have no heavy metal dyes, no formaldehyde. Ever smelled new clothes? That's chemicals off-gassing. That's not perfume that they've put on there. So we are shifting away from all of that and giving people, you can read, every rack sign will tell you, hemp, organic cotton, bamboo, recycled plastic bottles. This was organic cotton and it was produced in Philadelphia. This is organic cotton made in North Carolina. So we are thinking about this. Why? Because clothing production affects 1 in 6 humans on the planet. I'll say that again, about 1 billion people, from the farmers, the seed producers, the transporters, the mills, the dye houses, the cut, the sew, the designers, the retailers. From a garment to go from the dirt to your body has huge implications. So we have a motto which is, wear the change you wish to see in the world. Again, another play on one of my favorites, my old friend Gandhi, right? That we can actually create tremendous change by removing ourselves from the streams that are causing the problems and entering and making slightly better decisions about where stuff's coming from. So what has the result of this journey been for me? Right? The food, clothing, shelter. You've done great getting through all these things that have taken me 10 years. You've gotten in about 25 minutes. I have found new understandings about happiness. That the measures of happiness that I was chasing for much of my life were a little off. I've shed a lot of my needs. I've begun learning that happiness is something that we can cultivate through the choices that we make through our everyday choices of consumerism. And it took a really important question being asked. I used to spend my life saying, what do I need? What do I want? It was a very me-based way of living. And in recent years, I've shifted that to saying, what is the least that I need for the world to thrive? And when I ask that question, it changes all of my decisions. And it's been incredibly, incredibly impactful. I've really enjoyed this quote from the Dalai Lama. People think of it as a luxury, these choices that I'm talking about. And to me, I find them to be a necessity. It's taken me on a journey to change the money train. That much of the problems I was seeing in the world were actually because of where I was spending money, right? And that could I shift the money train into a different direction and connect with a different range of people. So what are the toolkits for doing this, right? Because it's fine and good to have some of these ideas. Well, to understand that happiness is a muscle. I didn't know this. I thought you just either were happy or you were not happy. I've experienced depression in my life. I've experienced anxiety. I think a number of people in our country experience those things. And I started reading about happiness and realizing that we can practice happiness, which sounded really strange to me when I first started chewing on that idea. But that actually, as we do things that cultivate more happiness in our lives, the neurons in our brain will fire differently. Now, is that a wild idea? We can change how the neurons in our brain, and the more that we surround ourselves with positive, happy ideas, those neurons will fire faster. And likewise, if we surround ourselves with negativity, drama, conflict, which is most of cable television, those neurons will fire faster, right? So our speed to wanting to seek drama, conflict, being wronged, getting cut off, getting stressed out on the road just goes faster and faster and faster. But we can rewrite that. We can actually change how our brain functions by the choices. And I believe that the daily consumer choices of where I spend my money and what I do with my money, while not being everything related to happiness, there certainly are micro moments where we can make our brain fire and make good decisions that we feel good about that generate increased levels of happiness in our lives. So the Dalai Lama is one tool that you can use. I think he'd say okay on that. As far as animals go, there is a documentary, the most comprehensive documentary called Earthlings. I highly suggest it. It looks at the 5 main ways that we think about animals. We wear them, we eat them, we own them as pets. We look at them as entertainment in circuses and in rodeos and beyond, and we test on them for science, right? It's like, whoa, the way in which humans are digging with animals is a little off, and that film's very powerful. As far as clothing goes, great film called True Cost. It's streaming on Netflix, if any of you have Netflix here. Incredibly well done, well shot documentary about the whole world of clothing, so you don't have to take my word for it. And I'll tell you, one of the most amazing things that happens now in the 4 years since I started Fed by Threads, I now have customers who come in eagerly ready to tell me, have you seen True Cost? And I just look up and say, wow, I don't have to do all the heavy lifting. And they say, you know, did you know that the leather tanneries in North India are dumping 50 million liters of effluent into the drinking water that's going downstream? And I say, I do know that. And I'm so glad you know that. So times are changing, and people are changing. Particularly the millennials are really beginning to think differently. They're driving less, which is really strange for the car companies. So in the fashion, True Cost is a great film. On the food side, one of my heroes, Michael Pollan, Omnivore's Dilemma, great. And he's not a vegetarian, okay? So you can be relieved to know this. But he's really looking at the food systems and connecting us more deeply to food. Omnivore's Dilemma, In Defense of Food. Barbara Kingsolver, who is a Tucson-based writer, she's got a great book, Animal Vegetable Miracle. Fantastic, fantastic book. So the food scene's got a ton of great tools that can help you rethink where your food's coming from. I'm writing a book called Good Elephant. It is this journey where I had no roadmap. It's the book that I wish I could have read in my 20s, of sort of how you rethink that hum of normalcy. And break, even my family and my friends, most of my world was surrounding me with all those ideas that were normal. And I've realized they're not normal. So it's a funny, sad, wild, crazy journey into trying to change the world. The last idea I want to pose to you is this. Many people see my life and they say, you're giving up so much. You're giving up all the pleasure that I take out of life. You are sapping it out of life. Why don't you live a little? I have gained so much through this journey. I've connected to people who are living through their hearts, who are willing to go through some of the less fun truths that I covered tonight to think, what is my place in the world? And it is this growing tide of people that paint a picture that's really bright for humanity and for the world. It may not seem like that every day, and when you get on this journey, you can feel alone in the beginning. But it's actually an incredible world of people that will be provided for you. And I count all of you as part of that. You're now part of the Fed by Threads family, whether you know it or not. We are about to cross 500,000 meals fed nationwide. That's going to happen March 1st. Keep your eyes out. We're going to have a huge community potluck where we're all going to break bread and eat together. Hopefully some of the food parts will land in there. We'll have some good food to eat together. But I really want you to take away from tonight that all of us are participants, and we can do amazing choices that will connect your heart to your daily life in a way that I didn't know was possible.